Our town, Blackwood Falls,
Has a dark secret.
every time a child is born, it is always twins. But there is a price to pay when they turn 18. The mother must choose one child to die, so the other can live a full life. My sister and I are identical twins, so similar that even our parents mix us up. Tomorrow is the weekend, and our family is going for a picnic by the river. The night before we left, I overheard my mother whispering in the kitchen. "We have to kill Layla," she said. My father let out a long, heavy sigh and finally grunted in agreement. A cold shiver ran from my toes to the top of my head as I stood there, frozen. My own mother wanted me dead. I couldn't believe it, but the truth was staring me in the face. Why did she choose to sacrifice me? I've spent years studying hard, being the perfect, obedient daughter. I'm better than my sister in every single way. If this was about survival of the fittest, my plain, average sister Tinsley should be the one to go. I was filled with a mix of burning hatred and paralyzing fear. The next morning, I did my best to act like nothing was wrong. Before we set off, I turned to my sister with a playful grin.
Hey,
"Want to play a game?"
Tinsley looked at me.
Her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What kind of game?" she asked. I gave her a mischievous smirk. "Let's swap identities for the day. You pretend to be Layla, and I'll be Tinsley. Let's see how long it takes for Mom and Dad to notice." She agreed immediately, thrilled by the idea. My trap was set. During the picnic, we wandered near the water. Mom stood by the riverbank and suddenly called out my name. "Layla." I felt a jolt of panic shoot through my body. Tinsley was already deep in her role and remembered our game. She answered naturally and ran over to Mom with a smile. I watched her go, knowing she was walking toward her grave. Then it happened.
Flash.
Without a single moment of hesitation, Mom pushed her into the freezing river. Tinsley thrashed in the water, her eyes wide with terror, as she tried to claw her way back to the bank. But Mom held her head down, pressing with all her strength. She didn't let go until the struggling stopped, and the water went still. Only then did Mom stand up, breathing a sigh of relief. My father and I watched the whole thing from the shore. I was horrified by my father's silence and my mother's cruelty. But mostly I was relieved that Tinsley had died in my place. After that day, I became Tinsley. Mom called the police and told them Layla had slipped and fallen into the river. When the detectives questioned me, I told them the exact same story at the funeral. The guests were draped in black and drowning in tears. Only Mom and I stood in the corner, hiding our twisted smiles. Once the guests left, Mom didn't shed another tear that night. She cooked a massive feast, looking happier than I'd ever seen her. She piled food onto my plate and served me soup. She kept smiling at me, reaching over to wipe a bit of grease from the corner of my mouth. I felt a strange sense of bliss. I was so glad I was the one who survived. Sometimes I wondered what her face would look like if she found out she killed the wrong daughter. The thought made me giddy. Late that night, I couldn't sleep from the excitement. I sat cross-legged on my bed, reading a textbook on aerospace engineering. My dream was to get into a top-tier flight academy. I was so absorbed in my reading that I didn't hear my father enter the room. When I looked up and saw him, I nearly jumped out of my skin, quickly shoved the textbook under my pillow, and forced a nervous laugh. I grabbed a trashy romance novel, The CEO's Obsession, from the nightstand instead. To avoid suspicion, I mimicked Tinsley's ditzy giggle.
Ugh.
Why would Layla like those boring science books?
They're so lame.
Despite my best acting, my father just stared at me with a hollow look in his eyes. My heart skipped a beat. Tinsley hated school and couldn't care less about astronomy or engineering. She spent all her time reading mindless stories about billionaires falling for high school dropouts. She was a fool who believed in fairy tales, with a 1 in a billion chance of happening. And yet Mom had chosen her over me. The look in Dad's eyes told me he knew exactly what I had done. I wanted to beg him for mercy, but he didn't say a word. He simply turned around and walked out of my room. I stayed awake all night, terrified he would tell Mom the truth. The next morning, I crept out of my room, trembling. Mom was in the kitchen humming a tune while she made a hot breakfast. Dad was sitting at the table with his head down, eating as if nothing had happened. Mom looked up and beamed at me. "Morning, Tinsley. Wash your hands and come eat, sweetie." I glanced at my father, stunned. He hadn't told her my secret. Why was he keeping it? I was confused, and although I felt a wave of relief, I felt like a ticking time bomb. After breakfast, Dad drove me to school. He remained silent the whole way, making no attempt to expose me. Finally, as I got out of the car, he spoke. "Be careful. Be careful? Be careful of what? Crossing the street or being caught? Was that a warning? Or did he actually care about me? I spent the whole day on edge, unable to focus on my classes. When I got home, I looked at Mom with a sense of dread. She gave me a warm look and asked, "What's wrong, baby? Did something bad happen today? Did you fail another test?" "It's okay if you did." I was holding a paper with a perfect score in my hand, but I hid it behind my back. I looked toward my father's room, feeling like a criminal. Mom noticed my strange behavior and followed my gaze to Dad. The next second, she pulled me outside and put a finger to her lips. "I figured it out a long time ago. That man isn't your father." My mind went completely blank as I stared at her in total confusion. "What do you mean Dad is Dad? How can he not be my father?" I couldn't wrap my head around her words. Mom gripped my shoulders firmly. "Wait for me out here. Whatever you do, do not go inside." Before I could ask anything else, Mom slipped back inside and locked the door. The fear inside me grew until I could hardly breathe. I stood there staring at the closed door. The house was deathly quiet. Eventually, I worked up the courage to peek inside. I checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bedrooms, but they were empty. My gut told me someone was in the bathroom. When I pushed the bathroom door open,
I saw Mom.
she was using a thick rope to strangle Dad. He was struggling weakly, his eyes bulging as he reached out a hand toward me. It was his final plea for help. But I stood there and did nothing, just as he had done nothing when Mom drowned my sister. My first thought was that if he died, my secret died with him. I wouldn't have to live in fear anymore. Once he was dead, I asked Mom why she did it. She told me she had known for 4 years that he wasn't my father. He was actually my father's twin brother. Silas was shocked. Wasn't Uncle Silas supposed to have died when he turned 18? That's when Mom revealed a massive secret to me. Mom and Dad were both born in Blackwood Falls. Naturally, they both had identical twins. That is the curse of our town. Mom was the one chosen to live, while her sister was sacrificed at 18. Mom and Dad were childhood sweethearts, their marriage arranged by their families. My father was a simple, quiet man who didn't say much. His brother Silas was charming, funny, and talented. But Silas was the one marked for death. He was supposed to have no future. Mom married my father as planned. She thought her life would be peaceful and predictable. Until 4 years ago. Mom's face twisted with anger as she remembered. I was cleaning the windows on the 16th floor balcony when I slipped. I almost fell to my death, but he caught my wrist with lightning. Fast reflexes. I knew right then. My husband was never that fast or that observant. The man standing there wasn't him. Something went wrong years ago. Silas had taken my father's place and lived his life. I couldn't believe my family was built on such a massive lie. I asked Mom, my voice shaking, "If you knew, why kill him now?" After all, he had played the role perfectly for years, and only exposed himself to save her life. Mom's expression turned cold and dark. He was the second-born.
He was supposed to die.
He has no right to be in this world. Her coldness terrified me. I started to tremble uncontrollably. If Mom ever found out my secret, would I end up like Silas? Mom thought. I was just shaken by the sight of the body. She shifted from a cold killer to a loving mother in an instant. She stroked my hair gently and said, "Don't be scared. Everything will be fine now." I nodded stiffly. Mom looked at Silas's body with a sense of relief. And as I turned away, I let out a hidden smile of my own. After he was gone, it was just the two of us. Nobody else bothered us anymore. To the neighbors, we were just a poor mother and daughter who had suffered too many tragedies. People were kind to us, offering help whenever they could. Days turned into weeks. One afternoon, I was cleaning Dad's room when I found a hidden letter in the desk. I opened it and found only 2 words written in red ink. "Be careful." The words hit me like a physical blow. I remembered him saying those exact words to me before. What was he trying to tell me to be careful of? Mom? I felt a sudden chill. Then I felt a pair of eyes watching me through the crack in the door.
Mom.
I panicked and tried to hide the letter. Before she could see it, she was standing perfectly still in the shadows, her eyes boring into. Slowly the door creaked open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I watched her hands, waiting for a weapon to appear. She wasn't holding a knife, though. She was holding my heavy aerospace engineering textbook. She looked at me with a terrifying, accusing glare. I broke into a cold sweat. I had hidden that book under my mattress. How did she find it? I was finished. Mom's voice was like ice. "Why are you reading this? You told me you hated science." I stammered, trying to find an excuse. I just used it to level my bed frame. The floor is uneven. Mom's gaze remained sharp. and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Suddenly, the phone in her pocket started ringing loudly. She gave me one last look and stepped away to answer it. I slumped against the wall, tears of terror streaming down my face. When she finished her call, I wiped my eyes and tried to act normal. Mom looked at me, her expression now filled with genuine grief. Your grandmother is dying. I have to go back to the village to say goodbye. The news shocked me, but it also felt like a stay of execution. I'm coming with you, I blurted out. I didn't actually care about my grandmother. We moved to the city when I was tiny. I had no connection to her or that creepy village, but I was dying to see Blackwood Falls for myself. I wanted to know why everyone was a twin and why one had to die. The road to Blackwood Falls did not feel like a highway, it felt like a descent. As the old sedan hummed along the asphalt, the towering glass facades of the city crumbled away, replaced first by sprawling gray suburbs, then by dense, claustrophobic stretches of pine forest. The trees grew so thick that they choked out the afternoon sun, casting long, skeletal shadows across the hood of the car. My mother sat at the wheel, her hands gripping the worn leather at the 10 and 2 position. Her posture was straight, her expression entirely serene. She was humming the same tuneless melody she had been whistling in the kitchen. That morning, it was a soft, airy sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Beside her, I sat in the passenger seat, my knees pulled up to my chest. I had a trashy romance novel, The CEO's Obsession, open in my lap. I was supposed to be Tinsley. I had to remember that. Tinsley would be twirling her hair. Tinsley would be sighing at the dramatic plot twists. Tinsley wouldn't be staring at the side view mirror, watching the gray road disappear behind us like a bridge being burned. Are you excited to see grandmother, sweetie? Mom asked, her voice dripping with maternal warmth. She didn't look at me, keeping her eyes fixed on the winding road. I guess, I mumbled, trying to pitch my voice to Tinsley's slightly higher, breathier register. I mean, it's sad she's sick, but I don't really remember her. We haven't been back since I was, what, 5? 4. Mom corrected gently. You were 4. It's a shame. Blackwood Falls is special. It has a way of calling its children back,
No matter how far they run.
A chill settled in my stomach. No matter how far they run. Was she talking about Silas? Silas, who had escaped his fate, took his brother's identity, and lived 4 decades in the city, only to be strangled to death in our bathroom. Dad loved the city, I said, testing the waters. Mom's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. The skin over her knuckles turned white. Your father was a weak man, Tinsley. He liked the city because it let him hide. But you can't hide from who you are. Not forever. She reached over and patted my knee. Her touch was warm, but it felt like the weight of a stone. You're a good girl, Tinsley, she whispered. You don't try to be anything. You're not. Unlike Layla. Layla always had her head in the clouds. Always. Thinking she was smarter than everyone else. It was her downfall, really. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes on the pages of the book. The print was a blur. She's testing me, I thought. She has to be. The textbook under the mattress, the sudden death of Silas, the red ink letter. It was all swirling around us like a storm. But I couldn't break character. If she knew I was Layla, she would kill me without a second thought. The rules of Blackwood Falls demanded one sacrifice. If she realized she had drowned the wrong twin, she would simply correct her mistake. Yeah, I forced a giggly, dismissive shrug. Layla was always so serious. It was kind of annoying. Like, chill out, it's just high school. Mom let out a soft, genuine laugh. Exactly, baby. Exactly. We crossed the county line an hour later. The wooden sign was rotting, its painted letters peeling off like dead skin. Welcome to Blackwood Falls. Population, 1,412. The air changed the moment we passed the sign. It became thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, river silt, and something sweet and decaying, like overripe fruit left to rot on the forest floor. The town itself looked like a relic of the mid-century, preserved in amber. The shops along the main street had faded awnings. The people walking the sidewalks moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. And as I stared out the window, my heart began to hammer against my ribs. I saw a pair of teenage girls walking out of a bakery. They wore identical yellow sundresses. Their faces were mirror images of one another. Further down the street, 2 elderly men in matching tweed caps sat on a park bench. Their identical Wrinkled faces turned toward the road as we passed. There were twins everywhere. But as I looked closer, I noticed something else. There were no young adults. There were children, toddlers holding hands, elementary schoolers playing in yards, all in identical pairs. And there were the elderly also in pairs.
But the
Middle-aged population, the people my mother's age, were entirely single. Mom, I whispered, forgetting myself for a fraction of a second. Why are there? It's the way of things here, Tinsley, Mom said, her voice dropping to a reverent, hushed tone. The town ensures our bloodlines remain pure. The twins are a blessing. But every blessing requires a tithe. A tithe? I repeated. The coal, she said simply. At 18, we return what is borrowed. It keeps the valley fertile. It keeps our families prosperous. Those who try to cheat the valley, well, the valley always collects its debts. The car turned off the main road onto a gravel path that wound deep into the
woods.
The branches of the trees met overhead, blotting out the sky entirely, turning the afternoon into a perpetual twilight. At the end of the path stood a massive, 3-story Victorian house. Its gray paint was peeling and the wraparound porch sagged like a broken jaw. This was my grandmother's house, the place where the cycle began. The interior of the house smelled of eucalyptus, beeswax, and the unmistakable, metallic tang of sickness. An old woman met us in the foyer. She looked so much like my mother that it felt like looking through a warped mirror. She had the same sharp cheekbones, the same pale blue eyes, but her skin was paper-thin and mapped with blue veins. Eleanor, the old woman whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping across concrete. Hello, Aunt Clara, Mom said, stepping forward to embrace her. Aunt Clara. I froze. If this was Aunt Clara, then where was grandmother? She's upstairs, Clara said, her eyes shifting to me. Her gaze was intense.
Dissecting.
She looked at my hair, my clothes, the way I stood. And this
is
Tinsley, Mom said quickly, her hand finding my shoulder and pressing down. Layla had an accident. A few weeks ago. Clara's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something dark and ancient passing through them. An accident. The river? Yes, Mom said, her voice steady. The river took her. Clara let out a low, whistling breath. The river is always hungry.
Come.
Your mother is waiting. She doesn't have much time. We followed Clara up the creaking wooden staircase. The walls were lined with old, silver-framed photographs. I looked at them as we walked, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Every single photograph depicted pairs. 2 identical little girls in Victorian
lace.
2 identical young men in World War I uniforms. 2 identical women, holding hands in front of this very house. But in every photograph, one of the faces had been violently scratched out. The silver backing of the mirrors had been scraped away, leaving only one clear face and one jagged, empty silver silhouette. It wasn't just a tradition. It was an erasure. Once a twin was sacrificed, they ceased to exist in the history of Blackwood Falls. At the end of the second-floor hallway, Clara pushed open a heavy oak door. The room inside was dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight. A single brass lamp on the nightstand cast a sickly yellow glow over the bed. Lying amidst a mountain of lace pillows was a woman so frail she looked like a skeleton draped in translucent skin. Her hair was white and wispy, spreading across the pillow like cobwebs. Her breathing was shallow, a wet, rattling sound that filled the silent room. Mother, Mom whispered, rushing to the bedside. She knelt, taking the old woman's hand. I'm here. I brought Tinsley. The grandmother's eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but there was a terrifying, sharp intelligence behind them. She turned her head, slowly, her neck clicking in the quiet room. She ignored my mother. Her gaze locked directly onto me. Come closer, the grandmother rasped. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn and run out of this house down the gravel road and never stop. But Mom was watching me.
Clara
was watching me. I took a slow step forward, dragging my feet. Hi, grandmother, I said, putting on Tinsley's soft, timid smile. The grandmother reached out a trembling, skeletal hand. Her fingers were crooked, the joints swollen with arthritis. She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was shockingly strong. It felt like a band of cold iron tightening around my skin. She pulled me down, forcing me to lean over the bed until her face was inches from mine. The smell of her breath was foul, like stagnant water. She stared into my eyes. Her milky gaze seemed to peer straight through my skull, dissecting my thoughts, reading the panic written in my DNA. The smart one, the grandmother whispered. My heart stopped. Mother, she's Tinsley, Mom said, a note of confusion creeping into her voice. Tinsley is the one who. The smart one, the grandmother repeated, her voice rising, becoming stronger, more frantic. She turned her head toward my mother, her grip on my wrist, tightening until my hand went numb. You fool, Eleanor. You drowned the sheep. Mom stood up, her face turning pale.
What? No.
Tinsley is here. Layla is the one who fell in. I saw her. I held her down. You held down the wrong one, the grandmother shrieked, a wet cough racking her chest. She spat a speck of dark blood onto the white sheets. She looked back at me, a terrifying, manic grin spreading across her wrinkled face. The wolf is wearing the sheep's wool. She played you, Eleanor, just like Silas played his brother. The silence in the room became absolute. I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to stone. I looked at my mother. Her pale blue eyes were wide, staring at me not with maternal warmth, but with a sudden, horrifying comprehension. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place in her mind. The aerospace textbook under the mattress. The perfect score on the test I had tried to hide. My father's silent knowing looks before she killed him. Layla? Mom whispered. The word was a death sentence. In that fraction of a second, my survival instinct, the same cold, calculating intellect that had allowed me to sacrifice my own sister, took over. I yanked my wrist free from the grandmother's grip. She let out a sharp cry as she fell back against the pillows. She's crazy, I screamed, backing away toward the door. Mom, she's dying. She doesn't know what she's saying. I'm Tinsley. I swear I'm Tinsley. Quiet. Aunt Clara snapped, stepping between me and the door. Mom didn't move. She just stood by the bed, her eyes locked on mine. The confusion on her face was rapidly being replaced by a cold, burning rage. You, Mom whispered. You played the game. You swapped with her.
No.
I cried, tears welling in my eyes. It wasn't hard to cry. The terror was real enough. Mom, please. Why would you think that? I hate science. I love those romance books. I don't know anything about aerospace. If you are Tinsley, Mom said, her voice dropping to a deadly, quiet hiss, then tell me what we did on your 10th birthday. What did I bake for you? My mind raced. My memory was flawless. I had spent my entire life studying, memorizing formulas, history, languages. I remembered our 10th birthday
Perfectly.
Mom had baked a strawberry shortcake with vanilla icing. But would Tinsley remember? Tinsley was ditzy, forgetful. I don't know. I sobbed, shaking my head. A cake? It had strawberries? Or chocolate? Mom, I'm bad at remembering things, you know that. Mom took a step toward me. Tinsley loved strawberry. She ate so much of it she threw up in the garden. Layla hated it. She refused to touch a single bite because she said the texture of the seeds made her gag. She reached into her pocket. My breath hitched as she pulled out a small, silver pocket knife. The blade flicked open with a soft, metallic click. Let's see if you'll eat a strawberry now, Layla, Mom whispered. Eleanor, stop. Clara's voice cut through the tension. Mom paused, her eyes still fixed on me. She lied to me, Clara. She made me kill her sister. My sweet, obedient Tinsley is at the bottom of the river because of this monster. The grandmother is dying, Clara said coldly. We do not spill blood in this room before the passing. The valley demands order. If she is the survivor, then she is the survivor. The valley accepted the sacrifice. The debt was paid. It was paid with the wrong blood. Mom snarled. The river does not care about names, Eleanor. The grandmother rasped from the
Bed.
Her voice was growing fainter, the rattle in her chest becoming heavier. It only cares about the flesh. But the wolf cannot stay.
She
will ruin us. She has the father's blood, Silas's blood. The grandmother's eyes rolled back into her head. A long, shuddering sigh escaped her lips, and her body went entirely limp. The wet rattling stopped. The room was silent save for the sound of our breathing. She's gone, Clara said quietly. She walked over and pulled the sheet over the grandmother's face. Then she turned to my mother. Go to the kitchen, Eleanor.
prepare the tea.
We have a wake to arrange. Mom stared at me for 3 long, agonizing seconds. The knife in her hand, trembled. But finally, she folded the blade back into the handle and shoved it into her pocket. "We'll finish this," Mom whispered to me. "When the sun goes down." She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy on the floorboards. Clara gave me one last, warning look before following her, locking the bedroom door from the outside with a heavy brass key. I was trapped in a room with my grandmother's corpse. I stood frozen in the center of the room. The yellow light of the lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the sheet-draped body on the
Bed.
"Think," I whispered to myself, pressing my palms against my temples. "Think, Layla.
You are smarter than them.
You survived the river. You survived Silas. You can survive this." But my knees were shaking. The cold reality was sinking in. My mother knew.
The
disguise was gone. The moment the sun set, she and Clara would come for me.
In
this town, where the police were likely part of the cult, there was no one to
call.
No one would help me. I needed a weapon. I needed an escape. I rushed to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtains. The glass was old and wavy. I tried to push the sash up, but it was painted shut. I looked
down.
It was a 3-story drop onto a stone patio. Jumping was suicide. I turned back to the room. I had to find another way out or something to defend myself. I began to search the grandmother's room. I opened the wardrobe, tossing aside smelling salts, mothballed shawls, and old medicine bottles. I opened the vanity drawers, finding nothing but old makeup and hairpins. Then I saw the desk in the corner. It was a heavy, dark mahogany secretary desk, with dozens of tiny drawers and pigeonholes. I began pulling the drawers out, dumping their contents onto the floor.
Old
letters, receipts from 40 years ago, tax documents. My hand brushed against the back of one of the empty drawer cavities. The wood felt loose. I pressed my fingers against it, and with a soft click, a hidden compartment popped open. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and stained with age. I opened it. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. The ink faded to a dull
brown.
The first page read, "The Ledger of the Covenant, Blackwood Falls, 1952. I flipped through the pages. It was a record of every birth and every sacrifice, dating back nearly a century. 1964. Twin boys born to the Vance family, Thomas and Arthur. Arthur sacrificed at the gorge. Thomas survives. 1972. Twin girls born to the Miller family,
Sarah and Jane.
Jane's sacrificed at the well. Sarah survives. And then, I found the entry for my mother's generation. 1986. Twin girls born to the Blackwood family, Eleanor and Beatrice. Beatrice sacrificed at the lake. Eleanor survives. I stared the name. Beatrice. My mother's sister. The one whose face had been scratched out of the photos downstairs. I flipped further, looking for my father's family. 1984. Twin boys born to the Sinclair family, Samuel and Silas. Beside Silas's name, there was no record of sacrifice. Instead, there was a note, written in the margin in a different, frantic hand. The tithe was not paid. Samuel drowned, but Silas fled. The valley demands its due. The bloodline is corrupted. The debt must be collected from the next generation. My breath caught in my throat. The debt must be collected from the next generation. Silas hadn't just escaped. He had run, and because the town couldn't find him, they had waited. They had forced my mother to marry Samuel, who was actually Silas in disguise. Wait, no. I reread the note. Samuel drowned, but Silas fled. If Samuel drowned, then Silas was the one who survived. Silas had taken Samuel's
place. But why?
If Silas was the one who was supposed to die, why did Samuel
drown?
I remembered what Mom had said. Silas was charming, funny, and talented. Samuel was a simple, quiet man. What if Samuel had sacrificed himself so Silas could live? Or what if Silas had murdered Samuel, just like I had murdered Tinsley? And because Silas lived, the town's curse was out of balance. The covenant required a perfect balance of life and death. Because Silas had cheated death, the town had demanded a double sacrifice from our generation. I kept flipping through the journal until I reached the final pages.
The ink.
Here was fresh, written in my grandmother's shaky hand. 2008. Twin girls born to Eleanor and Samuel, Silas. Layla and Tinsley.
Note.
The father is Silas. The blood is tainted. The balance must be restored. Both must return to the river. One at 18, the other to follow. I felt a cold dread wash over me. Both must return to the river. It didn't matter if I was Layla or Tinsley. The town was never going to let either of us live. The sacrifice of one was just the beginning. Because of Silas's sin, both of his daughters were marked for death. Mom hadn't chosen to save Tinsley. She had simply chosen the order of our
Deaths.
She was going to kill Tinsley first, and then eventually she was going
To kill me.
The whole thing was a lie. My perfect grades, my obedience, my struggle to be the perfect daughter. It had all been meaningless. I was doomed the moment I
Was born.
Suddenly, I heard a sound from the hallway. The heavy brass key was turning in the lock. I shoved the ledger into the waistband of my jeans, pulling my oversized sweater down to hide it. I quickly kicked the debris from the desk under the bed and stood in the center of the room, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. The door creaked open. It was Aunt Clara. She held a silver tray with a porcelain teapot and 2 cups. The steam rising from the cups smelled faintly of chamomile and something bitter like crushed almonds. Cyanide. Sit, child, Clara said, her voice smooth and empty of emotion. She set the tray on the nightstand beside the dead grandmother. You must be exhausted.
It
Has been a difficult day. I'm not thirsty, I said, my voice trembling. Clara looked at me, her pale eyes narrowing. You must drink. It is a tradition. In our family, we share a cup of tea in the presence of the deceased to help their soul pass into the valley.
She poured the tea.
The dark liquid swirled in the white porcelain cups.
She
handed one to me. Drink, Tinsley, she said. She was still calling me Tinsley, but her voice lacked any conviction.
It was a
play. They were playing with their food before they killed it. I took the cup. The porcelain was warm against my cold fingers. I looked at Clara, then down at the tea. I knew if I drank even a sip, I would never leave this room. I want Mom, I whimpered, letting Tinsley's childish vulnerability flood my voice. I want my mom. Why is she mad at me? Why did grandmother say those things? Clara sighed, a sound of mock pity. Your grandmother was old and confused.
Sweetie.
Your mother is just grieving. She loves you. Now, drink your tea.
It
will make the fear go away. Can you get her for me? I begged, taking a step closer to Clara.
I
let my hands shake, letting the tea slosh slightly over the rim of the cup. Please, Aunt Clara. I'm so scared. I want to see my mom. Clara looked at the cup, then at my tear-streaked face. For a second, a flicker of genuine hesitation passed through her eyes. Maybe she thought I really was the ditzy, helpless Tinsley. Maybe she thought she could end this quickly and painlessly without a struggle. Very well, Clara said, her voice softening slightly. I will get Eleanor.
But
you must drink before it gets cold. She turned toward the door. The moment her back was turned, I didn't hesitate. I took the heavy brass lamp from the nightstand. With all the strength I had, I swung it. The heavy metal base connected with the back of Clara's head with a sickening crack. She didn't even scream. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the hardwood floor, the silver tray clattering beside her. The teapot shattered, spilling the steaming, poisoned liquid across the floorboards. I stood over her, chest heaving, the lamp still clutched in my hands. Clara lay still, a thin trickle of blood pooling in her silver hair. She was breathing, but she was out cold. I dropped the lamp. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely function. Get out, I whispered to myself. Get out now. I searched Clara's pockets, my fingers slippery with sweat. I found the heavy brass key to the bedroom door and another ring of keys, likely to her car. I slipped the keys into my pocket, crept to the door, and peered out into the
hallway.
The house was dead silent. The smell of old wood and eucalyptus was suffocating. I crept down the hallway, keeping my back to the wall, avoiding the creaky floorboards. I made it to the top of the stairs and looked down into the foyer. The front door was locked with a heavy deadbolt, and standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a long, rusted carving knife, was my mother. She wasn't looking at the stairs. She was staring at a photograph on the wall, her expression completely vacant. She looked like a ghost inhabiting a corpse. Eleanor, a voice whispered from the darkness behind her. I gasped, pressing myself against the railing of the stairs. A man stepped out of the shadows of the dining room. He looked identical to my father, to Silas. But Silas was dead. I had watched my mother strangle him. The man was older, his face covered in scars, his clothes ragged and dirty. Samuel, Mom whispered, not looking surprised. My jaw dropped. Samuel, the brother who was supposed to have drowned 40 years ago. He was alive. She's upstairs, Samuel said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He sounded like he hadn't used his vocal cords in decades. Clara is with her. She's not Tinsley, Samuel, Mom said, her voice hollow. It's Layla. She killed our daughter. She let her drown. I know, Samuel said. He took a step closer to her. I saw them at the river.
I
was in the woods. I wanted to stop you, Eleanor. But I couldn't. If I showed myself, the town would have killed us both. You should have died 40 years ago, Mom said, her voice turning sharp, venomous. If you had died like you were supposed to, the valley wouldn't have demanded my girls. It's your fault. Yours and Silas's. Silas is dead, Samuel said quietly. I know you killed him.
I found his grave.
He was a thief, Mom spat.
He stole your life. He stole my family. He lived in
the city while you lived in the dirt like a rat. I chose to live in the dirt, so he could live, Samuel shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. We loved each other, Eleanor. We didn't want to play the town's game, but you loved the town more than you loved us. You loved the
covenant.
The covenant keeps us safe, Mom screamed, her face contorting with a feral, terrifying rage. Without the covenant, we are nothing. The valley would dry up. Our families would rot. Look at us. Samuel gesturing to the decaying house, to himself, to her.
We
are already rotting. The covenant is a cancer. I watched them from the shadows of the staircase, my mind reeling. Samuel was alive. He had been hiding in the woods of Blackwood Falls for 40 years, letting Silas live his life in the city. Silas had returned to our mother only when he felt the danger closing in. And Silas had tried to warn me. Be careful. He wasn't warning me about my mother. He was warning me about the town. About the fact that once the curse is broken, the town will do anything to correct the balance. We have to finish it, Mom said, her voice suddenly dropping to a calm, chilling whisper. Layla is Silas's daughter. She has his cleverness, his deceit. She cannot inherit this house. She must go into the river tonight. And what about you? Samuel asked. What happens when the town realizes you failed? That you let the wrong one live for 18 years? I will go with her, Mom said. A cold dread settled in my chest. She was completely insane. She was planning a murder-suicide to restore the balance. No, Samuel said, stepping forward, reaching for the knife in her hand.
I
won't let you kill another child. She's not a child, Mom shrieked, slashing the knife through the air. Samuel leaped back, but the blade caught his forearm, slicing through his
sleeve.
Blood, dark and thick, began to seep through the fabric. They began to struggle in the narrow hallway. Samuel was older, weakened by years of hiding, but he fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Mom fought with the maniacal strength of a religious zealot. This was my chance. I crept down the stairs, one agonizing step at a time, keeping my eyes locked on the struggling figures. They were too absorbed in their deadly dance to notice
me.
I reached the bottom of the stairs. The front door was only 10 feet away. I reached into my pocket, my fingers wrapping around Aunt Clara's car keys. Just as I reached the door, my foot brushed against a loose floorboard. It let out a sharp, loud creak. Both of them froze. They turned their heads slowly, like mechanical dolls, their eyes locking onto
me.
Layla, Mom whispered. Samuel looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and sorrow. Run, child, he roared. Mom lunged. She shoved Samuel aside with a strength that didn't seem human. She flew across the foyer, the rusted carving knife raised, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. I didn't try to unlock the deadbolt. I knew I didn't have the time. Instead, I dove to the side, throwing my body through the large, stained glass window beside the door. The glass shattered with a deafening roar. I tumbled onto the wooden porch, sharp shards of colored glass slicing through my sweater, cutting into my arms and face. Pain flared through my body, but the adrenaline washed it away. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the blood dripping from my forehead, and ran. The gravel driveway was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I fumbled, with the car keys in my pocket, my hands slick with blood. I found the button for the alarm and pressed it. A pair of headlights flashed in the darkness. A silver SUV parked near the edge of the woods. Aunt Clara's car. I ran toward it, my lungs burning, the cold night air biting at my cuts. Behind me, I heard the front door slam open. Layla, Mom's voice echoed through the trees. It didn't sound like a mother's voice anymore. It sounded like a screeching owl, high-pitched and wild. I reached the SUV. I unlocked the doors, yanked the driver's side door open and threw myself inside. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw the car into reverse, ready to slam on the gas and crash through the gates of this godforsaken town. But as the headlights swept across the driveway, they illuminated a figure, standing in the middle of the gravel path. It wasn't my mother. It was a crowd of people,
Dozens of them.
they stood in the driveway, blocking the exit. They were dressed in simple, dark clothing, and as the headlights hit their faces, I saw the truth of Blackwood Falls. They were all twins. Identical elderly men. Identical middle-aged women. All of them standing, side by side, their faces pale, expressionless, and completely uniform.
They
Held torches, rakes, and heavy iron pipes. The covenant. They had been waiting for us. They knew the grandmother was dying. They knew the debt had to be paid. Get out of the car, Layla. A voice spoke from the darkness beside my window. I screamed, jumping in my seat. My mother was standing right outside the glass. Her face was pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass. She tapped the rusted carving knife against the pane.
tap, tap, tap.
You can't leave, she whispered through the glass. The valley doesn't let anyone leave. I looked at the crowd blocking the driveway. I looked at my mother. I had the car. I could run them over. I could slam on the gas and pray the metal of the SUV was stronger than their resolve. But then, the passenger's side window shattered. Hands, rough, cold hands, reached through the broken glass, grabbing my hair, my arms, pulling me toward the passenger seat. I fought, kicking and screaming, but there were too many of them. The driver's door was yanked open. My mother reached in, her fingers wrapping around my throat, cutting off my air. It's time to go to the river, Layla, she whispered, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, empty of any sanity. Tinsley is waiting for
You.
I thrashed, but the darkness was already closing in. The lack of oxygen, combined with the loss of blood from the glass cuts, made my limbs heavy. They dragged me out of the car. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was Samuel, standing on the porch of the house, his arm bleeding, watching me with tears streaming down his face as they dragged me into the dark woods. I woke up to the sound of rushing water. The air was freezing, damp, and smelled of rot and pine. I was lying on the wet mud of the riverbank, my hands tied tightly behind my back with thick rope. The same river where Tinsley had died. The water was black, churning violently over the jagged rocks. The moon had finally broken through the clouds, casting a pale, silver light over the scene. Surrounding me in a wide circle were the townspeople of Blackwood Falls.
They
Stood in silent pairs, their torches casting flickering, orange shadows across the water. In the center of the circle, standing over me, were my mother and Aunt Clara. Clara had a white bandage wrapped around her head, her face pale and furious. She tried to kill me, Eleanor, Clara hissed. She is a monster, just like her father. She is Silas's blood, Mom said. She was holding the heavy leather-bound ledger I had stolen from the grandmother's desk. She threw it into the mud beside my
face.
She wanted to expose us. She wanted to destroy the covenant. I struggled to sit up, the mud sticking to my clothes, cold water lapping at my
Boots.
You're all insane. I spat, my voice raw and cracking. You're killing your own children for a lie. There is no curse. It's just a sick, twisted game you play to feel important. An elderly man in the crowd stepped forward. He looked identical to the man standing beside him. It is not a game, child, he said, his voice deep and echoing. For 100 years, our valley has thrived. Our crops do not fail. Our children are born healthy. Our town is untouched by the diseases and tragedies of the outside world. Do you know why? Because you murder half of them, I screamed. Because we understand balance, the man said. Nature demands a price for perfection. We do not choose who dies. The mothers choose. It is the ultimate test of devotion to the community. A mother who can sacrifice her own flesh to ensure the survival of the town is a mother who will never betray us. The horrific truth settled in. It wasn't a supernatural curse. It was a cult of absolute control. The twins were a genetic anomaly of the valley, yes, but the sacrifice was a psychological
Tool.
By forcing every mother to murder one of her own children, the town leaders ensured total obedience. Who would ever rebel against a system they had sacrificed their own child to maintain? To admit the system was a lie would be to admit they were monsters. They had to believe. They had to keep killing to justify the deaths of the past. And Silas? I asked, looking at my mother. What about my father? He lived. He escaped. And look what happened, Mom said, her voice trembling with emotion.
He
brought corruption.
He brought you.
A girl who would murder her own sister just to save herself. I didn't murder her, I shouted. You did. You held her head under the water. Because you tricked me, Mom screamed, her face contorting. You played the game. You let her walk to her grave. Because I wanted to live, I yelled back. Just like you wanted to live when you sacrificed Beatrice. Don't pretend you did it for the town, Mom.
You did it.
Because you're a coward. You wanted to live your peaceful, predictable life. And you didn't care who had to die for it. My words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled back a step, her eyes wide with shock. The townspeople murmured, a low, angry hum rising from the crowd. Enough, Aunt Clara said, stepping forward. She grabbed my hair, pulling my head back, exposing my throat to the cold wind. The tide is high. The river is ready.
Mom looked at me.
For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of the mother who used to bake cakes and brush my hair. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, glassy stare of the Blackwood women. Do it, Eleanor, Clara said, handing her the rusted carving knife. Restore the balance. Kill the wolf. Mom took the knife. She walked toward me, her boots squelching in the mud. She knelt beside me, her eyes locked on mine. I'm sorry, Layla, she whispered. But you were always too smart for this world. She raised the knife. I didn't close my eyes. I stared directly into hers, refusing to show her the satisfaction of my fear. If you kill me, I whispered, you kill the only part of Tinsley you have left, because I am her, and she is me. We are the same. Mom froze. The knife hovered inches from my chest. Her hand began to shake. No, she whispered. You're Layla. Am I? I let out a cold, desperate laugh. Are you sure? Can you ever be 100% sure, Mom? What if Tinsley was the one who was smart? What if Tinsley was the one who had the book? What if you're about to kill the daughter you actually loved? Stop it, Mom shrieked, pressing the tip of the knife against my throat. A tiny bead of blood welled under the metal. Stop lying. Eleanor, do it, Clara yelled. She's manipulating you. The crowd began to close in, their torches drawing closer, the heat of the flames melting the frost on the grass. Do it, they chanted. Restore the balance. Pay the debt. Mom's breathing was frantic. She looked at the crowd, then at Clara, then down
At me.
The psychological pressure of a lifetime of conditioning combined with the horrifying doubt I had just planted in her mind was breaking her. I don't know, Mom sobbed, tears finally spilling from her eyes. I don't know who you are. She is your daughter, Eleanor. A voice called out from the darkness of the
woods.
The crowd turned. Samuel stepped out from the trees. He was holding a rusted iron pipe, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was covered in sweat and dirt, but his eyes were clear. Samuel? Clara gasped. How are you? You were supposed to be dead. I should have died 40 years ago, Samuel said, walking slowly toward the circle. The townspeople backed away from him, shocked by the appearance of a
ghost.
But I lived, and I watched what this town did to my family. I watched you turn my wife into a murderer. I watched you kill my daughter. He looked at my mother. Eleanor, look at her. It doesn't matter if she is Layla or Tinsley. She is your blood. She is the only thing we have left. She killed Tinsley, Samuel. Mom cried. No, Samuel said, standing at the edge of the circle. We killed Tinsley.
All of us.
By maintaining this sick lie. He's a traitor, Clara screamed. Kill them both. The valley demands it. Clara lunged toward me, reaching for the knife in my mother's hand. But Samuel was faster. He swung the iron pipe with all his remaining strength. It connected with Clara's shoulder with a sickening crunch. She screamed, falling into the mud. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some of them lunged at Samuel, while others, shocked by the violence, hesitated. In the confusion, I didn't waste a second. I rolled onto my stomach, using the sharp edge of the silver-framed ledger lying in the mud to saw at the ropes binding my wrists, the paper-thin metal corner of the frame was sharp enough to slice through the coarse fibers. "Eleanor, run," Samuel shouted, fighting off two men with the pipe. Mom was frozen, holding the knife, staring at the chaos around her. "Mom," I screamed, my hands finally breaking free from the ropes. I scrambled to my feet. I grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her toward the woods. "We have to go."
Now.
Mom looked at me, her eyes wide with terror, but she let me pull her. "Samuel," she cried, looking back. Samuel was surrounded by the townspeople. He looked back at us, a sad, peaceful smile on his face. He knew he wasn't going to make it. He had spent 40 years running, and he was finally ready to stop. "Go," he whispered, his voice lost in the roar of the river. A heavy blow from a wooden club brought him to his knees. I yanked my mother's arm, forcing her to turn away. We ran into the dark, thick woods, the screams of the Covenant and the roar of the river fading behind us. We ran for hours. We didn't stop until the sky began to turn a pale, bruised purple in the east. The woods eventually gave way to a state highway, miles away from the valley of Blackwood Falls. We sat on the guardrail, shivering, covered in mud, blood, and sweat. The physical toll of the night was agonizing, but the psychological silence was louder. My mother sat 3 feet away from me. The rusted carving knife was gone, dropped somewhere in the forest. She looked small, fragile, and completely broken. The fierce, terrifying woman who had strangled Silas and drowned Tinsley was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. I looked at my hands. They were scraped and stained with dirt. I reached into my pocket. Aunt Clara's car keys were still there.
And in my
waistband, the damp leather ledger was heavy against my skin. I pulled the ledger out. I opened the wet pages, looking at the names of the sacrificed. Decades of children, erased from existence to maintain a horrific lie of perfection. I took out a book of matches I had slipped from the grandmother's kitchen earlier. I struck a match. The small, yellow flame flickered in the morning breeze. I held it to the corner of the ledger. The dry, old paper caught quickly. The flames licked up the edges, turning the names of the lost into ash. I watched as Beatrice, Arthur, and Jane vanished into the fire. Finally, the fire reached the entry for Layla and Tinsley. I let the burning book drop onto the gravel beside the highway, watching it burn, until it was nothing but a pile of gray dust. "We go to the city," I said, my voice cold, steady, and entirely my own. "No more Tinsley. No more games." Mom looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you my smart girl? Or my sweet girl?" I stood up, stepping over the ashes of the ledger. I looked down at her with a calm, indifferent smile. "Does it matter?" I asked. "You only have one daughter now." She stared at me, the horror of what she had done, and what she had created, finally settling into her eyes. She realized that by trying to weed out the weak, she had survived only to be left with the monster she had forged in the river. I turned and began walking down the empty highway, the scent of pine fading behind me, replaced by the smell of asphalt and the promise of a long, cold future. Behind me, my mother slowly stood up and followed, keeping a safe, terrified distance.